She looked at me that night with eyes that carried both promise and warning. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "One night could rewrite everything, or break it." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just temptation, it was the kind of choice that could change both our lives forever. I hadn't planned on staying long that evening. My friend had invited me over to watch a game, maybe grab a late dinner, nothing unusual. But when I stepped inside his house, the air felt different, warmer, quieter, as if the night itself wanted to slow down. And then she appeared. His mom. She wasn't rushing around like most parents do when their son has company. Instead, she carried herself with the kind of calm confidence that turned the simplest gesture into something graceful. A loose sweater fell gently over her shoulders, and her hair, just slightly undone, framed her face in a way that made her seem softer than usual. "Glad you could make it," she said, smiling, and her voice carried that low, soothing tone I'd always noticed but never thought too hard about. She reached out to take my jacket, and in that brief moment, when her fingers brushed mine, I felt a quiet warmth settle into me, subtle, but enough to leave a trace. We moved into the living room where the lights were dimmed to a golden glow. The scent of coffee lingered faintly in the air, mixed with something sweet from the kitchen. My friend was already sprawled across the couch, distracted by his phone, so I ended up closer to her than I expected. She poured us drinks, her movements unhurried, and when she set a glass in front of me, her hand rested on the edge of the table for just a second longer than it needed to. I caught myself noticing too much. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she asked if I was keeping busy these days. The way her eyes seemed to actually wait for my answer instead of just filling the silence. It wasn't what she said, it was the way she listened, with that quiet attentiveness that made me feel strangely seen. My friend chimed in occasionally, tossing in a joke or two, but more and more, I found my focus drifting toward her. Every time our eyes met across the table, something flickered, not dramatic, not loud, just present. Like a note of music held too long, waiting for resolution. When she leaned forward to pass me a plate, her hand brushed against my forearm. It should have been nothing, a passing touch, barely there, but I felt it. The warmth of her skin lingered, and suddenly I was aware of the space between us, how small it had become. I shifted back, tried to focus on the game starting on the TV, but the room felt charged in a way I couldn't ignore. Every small gesture, the curve of her smile, the light in her eyes, even the silence that fell when she sipped from her glass, seemed to draw me in further. That night hadn't even begun, and already something had shifted. A simple gathering had turned into something else entirely, something I couldn't yet name, but I knew I'd feel long. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, the kind where background noise filled the air and no one really noticed time passing. But before long, my friend disappeared upstairs, muttering something about a call he needed to take. His footsteps faded, and suddenly it was just the two of us in the living room. The TV hummed with the low sound of the game, but neither of us were really watching. She sat across from me, her posture relaxed but her eyes carrying something different, a softness, like she was letting me see a side of her usually tucked away. "You've grown quieter these days," she said, tilting her head. "What's on your mind?" It startled me, how easily she asked. Most people never looked past the surface, never pressed beyond the small talk. But she did. And there was no impatience in her voice, only curiosity, as though she genuinely wanted to know. I tried to shrug it off with a smile, but she didn't look away. Her gaze held mine, steady, searching. It was unnerving in the gentlest way. So I answered. "Not everything, not the deepest parts of me, but enough. About my studies, my uncertainty about what came next, the feeling that everyone else seemed to have their lives figured out while I was still searching for mine." She listened, really listened. Not once did her eyes drift to the TV or her phone. And when I finished, she leaned back, exhaling softly, as if my words had touched something in her too. "You know," she said, her voice low, thoughtful, "people spend years pretending they're certain. Truth is, most of us are still figuring things out. The ones who act like they've got it all together usually don't." Her words settled in me with a surprising weight. It wasn't advice in the usual sense, not a lecture, not a reassurance meant to brush me off. It was honesty. Vulnerable. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, thick with something unspoken. Our eyes met again, and for a moment, it felt like the air between us narrowed into just that connection, her, me, and nothing else. She reached for the wine bottle, and as she poured into my glass, her fingers brushed mine. It was the smallest touch, but it set something alight beneath my skin. My pulse quickened, and when I looked up, her eyes lingered on mine a beat too long before she pulled back. We laughed at something trivial a moment later, but the sound didn't chase away the tension. If anything, it deepened it, laughter softening into a silence that said more than words could. Her knee grazed mine under the table, just slightly, and neither of us moved away. I wondered if she noticed the way my breath caught. And then I realized she did. Because her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that told me she was just as aware of this fragile, dangerous shift as I was. After I left, the living room felt smaller by the minute, like the walls themselves had begun to notice the weight of the silence between us. She shifted in her chair, her eyes flicking toward the window where the curtains barely moved with the breeze outside. "Let's get some fresh air," she said suddenly, her voice gentle, almost casual. But there was something underneath it, an invitation, maybe even a test. I followed her to the back door, and the cool night air met us as we stepped out. The garden stretched wide, touched by the faint glow of porch light, and beyond that, shadows swallowed the edges of the yard. The hum of distant traffic mingled with the steady chorus of crickets. It was quieter here, and that quiet seemed to press us closer together. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself, though the chill didn't seem too strong. It felt more like a gesture of thought, a pause before speaking. "Sometimes I forget how peaceful it is at night," she said softly, eyes turned toward the dark sky. "It makes you think about things you usually ignore." Her words drifted over me, and I found myself watching her profile in the glow of the porch light. The curve of her jaw, the way her hair caught the faint breeze, she seemed so near, and yet untouchable, as though the air itself wanted to keep her just out of reach. We walked slowly, our steps falling in rhythm across the stone path. Our shoulders brushed once, lightly, and neither of us pulled away. That single touch seemed louder than the crickets, louder than the hum of the night. She glanced at me, her eyes holding mine for a breath longer than necessary. I could almost see the thought flicker across her face, words she wanted to speak but held back. There was a softness in her gaze, but also hesitation, like she was weighing something heavy inside. At the edge of the garden, we stopped. The world felt still, except for the faint rustle of leaves overhead. She drew in a slow breath and let it out in a sigh that sounded more tired than she intended. "There are moments," she said quietly, "when you realize how close you are to crossing a line. And once you do, you can't go back." Her words hung in the air between us, delicate and dangerous all at once. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I only watched her, the glow of the porch light softening the tension in her face, making her look both strong and deeply human. A pause lingered, one heartbeat, then another. I wanted to close the space, to tell her that whatever line she feared, I already felt myself standing on it too. But I didn't move. Neither did she. Instead, we let the silence carry what we couldn't yet admit. And in that silence, under the cool night sky, I knew this wasn't just an ordinary evening anymore. Something fragile and unspoken was pulling us closer, and it was only a matter of time before one of us broke the silence for good. We lingered at the edge of the garden longer than we should have. The air felt heavier now, not because of the chill, but because of everything unsaid between us. She finally turned, her eyes lowered, and for the first time that evening, the confidence I always associated with her seemed to waver. "Let's head back in," she said softly, almost as if she needed the safety of the house to protect her from what was unraveling between us outside. We slipped back into the warm light of the living room, but instead of reclaiming opposite chairs, she lowered herself onto the couch, leaving enough space for me but still closer than before. Something about the way she sat, her shoulders curved in slightly, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, told me she was carrying something heavy, something she rarely let show. The silence stretched, until finally she spoke. Her voice was quieter this time, stripped of its usual steadiness. "You know, people assume I've got everything figured out." She gave a faint, humorless laugh. "I don't. Most days, I feel like I'm just holding everything together with threads." I didn't answer right away. I just listened, the weight of her words settling in my chest. She looked at me then, her eyes glistening, not with tears but with something softer, that quiet vulnerability you rarely see in someone who's always been strong for others. "I don't usually talk like this," she admitted, her hand brushing across her temple as if she could smooth away her thoughts. "But tonight feels different. You listen differently." Her words startled me, in the best way. She was right. I wasn't just hearing her, I was holding on to every syllable, every pause, as though they mattered more than anything else in the room. Instinctively, I leaned closer, careful not to push the space too far. "Maybe you just don't let people see the real you often," I said gently. Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I just stopped expecting anyone to notice." The ache in her voice tugged at me. Without thinking too much, I let my hand rest lightly on hers. Just enough for her to feel it, not enough to startle her. Her fingers tensed at first, then softened, her thumb brushing faintly against my skin as if testing the reality of the moment. She drew in a breath, shaky but steadying as she exhaled. That simple contact, so small, seemed to unravel the walls she'd kept up. Her shoulders relaxed, and she looked at me with an openness I hadn't seen before. In that moment, she wasn't the confident, composed woman I'd always admired from a distance. She was human. Lonely. Brave enough to let me see her unguarded. The quiet stretched between us, fragile yet unbreakable, like a thread pulling tighter with every second. Her hand was still resting beneath mine, warm and steady, and though either of us spoke, everything felt louder, the ticking clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of our own breathing. When she finally shifted, it wasn't to pull away. Instead, she let her hand remain close, her shoulder leaning ever so slightly in my direction. The couch that had once felt wide now felt impossibly small. The lights in the room had dimmed to a soft, golden haze, shadows pooling in the corners. My friend upstairs had long since disappeared into silence, and the house carried an intimacy it never had before. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. Our knees brushed. Once. Twice. Then, without either of us moving, they stayed that way, pressed gently together, as if either of us dared to create more distance. She turned toward me, and I saw it then, the uncertainty in her eyes, mixed with something far more dangerous, longing. My chest tightened. The air seemed to thicken between us, every second stretched into something endless. I didn't mean to lean in. Not consciously. It was as if the moment pulled me forward, as if gravity itself had changed direction. Her eyes flickered to my lips, just for a heartbeat, before finding mine again. And in that look, there was no denial. Her hand shifted, brushing against my wrist, the softest touch, but enough to send a shiver racing up my arm. Her breath mingled with mine now, warm and uneven. All I had to do was close the last inch between us. But she pulled back, just barely. Her lips parted, trembling with the words she hadn't wanted to say but couldn't keep inside. "One night," she whispered, her voice low and breaking at the edges, "could rewrite everything, or break it." The words hit me harder than if she had kissed me. They carried both a promise and a warning, spoken not as a rejection but as a plea. A plea to understand the cost of what was happening, of what we both already felt. For a moment, we just sat there, suspended in that fragile space. Her fingers were still on my wrist, lingering, even as her eyes told me she was afraid of the very thing she wanted. I swallowed hard, searching for something to say, but all I could manage was a whisper. "Maybe some things are worth the risk." Her eyes softened at that, but she shook her head gently, as if reminding herself of boundaries she couldn't ignore. And yet, she didn't move away. The almost kiss hung in the air like an unfinished sentence, the kind that lingered longer than any words could. The silence after her words felt heavier than anything that had come before. One night could rewrite everything, or break it. They weren't just words. They were a wall she had built in front of us, a reminder of everything at stake. Yet even as she leaned back slightly, her hand didn't leave mine. Her thumb traced a slow, unconscious circle against my skin, as though her body betrayed what her voice was trying to hold back. I knew I couldn't leave it there, in that half space of tension and retreat. So I drew in a breath, steadying my voice, and spoke. "You don't have to say anything back," I began quietly. "But I need to be honest. Tonight, you've made me realize how much I notice you. Not just tonight, if I'm being fair. For a long time." Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, uncertain, yet she didn't pull away. So I went on. "It's not just how you look, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't drawn to you. It's the way you carry yourself, how you listen, how you make a room feel calm without even trying. You see people in a way most don't, in a way I didn't even realize I needed." I could feel my pulse in my throat as I spoke, but the words came easier with each breath. "And maybe this is selfish, maybe it's reckless. But sitting here, with you tonight, I don't want to pretend anymore." For a moment, she said nothing. Her gaze dropped to where our hands were still joined, her thumbs still moving against me. The rise and fall of her chest slowed, as though she were steadying herself against the weight of my words. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? What this could mean for you, for me?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I do. Maybe not everything. But I know it means something. And I'd rather face the risk than walk away pretending I don't feel this." She leaned back slightly, as if to take me in more fully, her eyes searching mine for hesitation, for doubt. But there wasn't any. Only truth. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her eyes glistened with something she hadn't wanted to show, a crack in the armor she'd worn so carefully. She let out a trembling breath, and for the first time, I felt her let herself be seen. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered. I shook my head faintly. "No. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever said. But it's the truest." The stillness that followed felt almost sacred. She didn't answer right away, maybe because no answer was enough. But she didn't move away either. The house was utterly still, the kind of silence that made even a whisper feel too loud. Her hand was still in mine, warm and steady, though her eyes carried the storm of everything unsaid. For a long moment neither of us moved. We just existed there, in that fragile space where truths had been spoken and nothing could be taken back. Finally, she exhaled, a long, heavy breath, as though she'd been holding it for far too long. She shifted, turning slightly toward me, her fingers brushing against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a shiver down to my chest. "You don't know what you've done tonight," she said softly, her voice trembling at the edges. "You've made me feel seen in a way I haven't in years. And that scares me more than I can explain." I leaned into her touch, not pushing for more, just letting the warmth of her hand ground me. "Then maybe being scared means it matters," I whispered. Her lips curved into a small, aching smile. She let her hand linger on my cheek, her thumb brushing once against my skin, before she slowly pulled it back. The loss of her touch left a hollow ache, but the look in her eyes held me steady. "We can't be reckless," she murmured. "Not with your friendship with him. Not with everything that could unravel." "But," her gaze softened, glistening with unspoken emotion, "pretending this doesn't exist would be a lie. And I don't want to lie, not to you, and not to myself." Her words wrapped around me like both a boundary and a gift. There was no kiss, no dramatic surrender. Instead, there was something deeper, recognition. She leaned forward just enough to press her lips, not to mine, but to my forehead. The kiss was tender, lingering, carrying the weight of everything she couldn't say aloud. My eyes closed instinctively, and in that brief moment, I felt her heartbeat in the silence, steady against the unsteady rhythm of mine. When she pulled back, her hand cupped my face once more, Some connections, she whispered, are too rare to ignore, even if they can't be rushed. I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. Then we don't rush. We just let it be what it is. Her smile deepened, though it carried sadness too. She rose from the couch slowly, and I followed, both of us reluctant to break the closeness we'd found. At the door, she hesitated, her fingers brushing over my arm one last time. "Good night," she whispered, her voice fragile but warm. I stepped out into the cool night, the world suddenly larger, yet emptier without her beside me. She stood at the doorway, framed by the soft glow of the house lights, watching as I walked down the path. And though I left with no promises, no certainties, I carried something far stronger, the quiet, undeniable truth that one night had changed everything.